And in terms of the science, I just move on to the science and we'll do the kind of heady stuff because I think it's really good to understand it. And there's tons of stuff online. So you can find any of this online if you want to. But for their first sort of bit of research or experiment, there's a doctor in Japan that's quite famous now called Miyazaki. And he took 12 Japanese businessmen for a walk in the forest in the morning. And then in the afternoon, he took them for a walk in the shopping mall. And as you can imagine, comparing the results, I'm sure none of us here need to be persuaded on this, but sure enough, when they went to the forest, they felt much more relaxed than being in the shopping mall. I can definitely relate to that. And later they started doing real sort of proper clinical research and began to measure blood and saliva samples. And they do that before and after the walks. And I thought I would just share some of that research with you because it's absolutely fascinating. So one of the things they found was a significant elevation in what we call, they're called NK cells in our body, which stands for natural killer cells. So these cells are naturally produced by our body anyway, and they go around the bloodstream and they scavenge for diseased or damaged cells. So it might be cells that are infected by virus or also cancerous cells, or there may be cells that have kind of reached the end of their life. So these NK cells, they discover those weakened or damaged cells, they target them and they eliminate them. And what they found that after a day's walk in the forest, that these NK cells were elevated significantly. But what's really interesting is that elevation lasted for up to a month afterwards, after a day's walking in the forest. So what we're talking about with this, in relation to our immune system, is that if you think about it as a prescription, so one day's walking in the forest will give you an immune booster for up to a month afterwards, which when I was reminded of that, and I keep having to remind myself of that, I mean, it's really quite incredible stuff. And the second thing they found that was there is a significant a reduction in our stress hormones. So adrenaline and cortisol. And what they did was they measured the saliva, and they did this before and after the walks in the forest. And they proved that there was a big reduction in the stress hormones. And what was also interesting is that was even so for people suffering from significant trauma in their lives and people with PTSD. So even those people had a significant reduction in their stress hormone levels. And they also looked at the psychological benefits of being in the forest. So things like anxiety, depression, anger, fatigue, I think, and confusion. And all of those were significantly reduced. And that's even after just a 2-hour walk in the forest, because obviously not all of us have, all day to spend there. But one of the reasons they discovered that the forest environment provides such a relax to the body is it's the way that our eyes focus on the forest environment without having to pay any particular sort of direct focused attention. So it's actually what happens is the brain sort of recalibrates, and it's a bit like, I think you could say, like defragging of a computer. So the brain recalibrates itself because it's not required to focus in the same way as if we're looking at a computer, or if we're driving, or video games, or even being in a flat, with kind of square walls, obviously watching TV. But when you're looking at a forest environment, it allows the brain to relax. And I'll come on to why that probably is. And it's a term called soft fascination. And then they also looked at blood pressure, and a lot of research has gone into looking at blood pressure and heart rate variability, what happens to that in the forest. And they discovered that a walk in the forest was clinically proven to be more effective on blood pressure than blood pressure medication. Wow. So something not to. I mean, I'm sure big pharma companies know about that, but it's incredibly powerful. And what they found actually is it doesn't just lower blood pressure if they've got high blood pressure, but it regulates it. So if you've got low blood pressure, it will bring it up. And then they also discovered that it assists people with sleep disorders. I mean, there's so many, I mean, I see it with my breath practice as well. There's so many different types of insomnia. And they found, I think it was about a 15% increase in people's sleeping rates after time spent in the forest. I think that was after a day. And I'll just leave the science bit behind, but just finally, the last thing that I think is really interesting, it's the activity of the parasympathetic nervous system. So that's our rest, relax, and heal system. And it decreased the activity of the sympathetic nervous system, which is our fight or flight response. So when we're in a stressed response, when we're in maybe an urban environment, for example, our body, we have something called the vagus nerve, which runs through a significant part of our body, but through the front of our body. And it perceives things like urban environments as slightly stressful. And so it triggers off our sympathetic nervous system. And then we have this sort of chronic fight or flight response, which is going on under the surface. And actually you'll find a lot of people now, because it is quite a stressful, modern living is quite stressful, then a lot of people are in that state a lot of the time. And being in the forest, which is a little bit like Stella talked to us about, is allows us to switch over to that parasympathetic nervous system, which is our healing system. And it particularly affects our digestive system. So it allows us to digest, assimilate our food, extract waste, and extract goodness from it, because it's healing our whole system. So all of those things you can look up. I mean, it's a very quick sort of run around some of the science that has come out of that research.